Thomas and Margaret Brennan had worked the land for 47 years, their calloused hands and weathered faces testament to decades of dawn-to-dusk labor. Now, standing in the dusty driveway of their foreclosed farm, they watched strangers cart away their possessions while their loyal cattle dog, Duke, pressed against Margaret's legs. Their 3 children, successful, wealthy, and distant, had gathered not to help, but to deliver what they called the only practical solution. "Dad, you can't keep pretending everything's fine," said Robert, their eldest, adjusting his expensive watch. "Mom needs constant medical care, and you're in no shape to provide it." Thomas stared at the auction notice fluttering against the barn door. "We mortgaged this place 3 times. Once for your restaurant that failed, once for Catherine's graduate school, and again when Michael needed money for his debts." "That was years ago," Catherine interjected, her lawyer's briefcase gleaming in the afternoon sun. "What matters now is reality. We've arranged spots at Meadowview Assisted Living. They have excellent facilities." "And Duke?" Margaret asked quietly, oxygen concentrator humming beside her. Robert's wife Amanda spoke from their luxury SUV. "The facility doesn't allow animals. We've contacted a shelter that specializes in older dogs. It's the most humane option." Humane. Thomas felt something break inside him. Not his heart, but his patience. "I spent 35 years maintaining equipment at the grain elevator so you 3 could have college educations. Your mother damaged her lungs working double shifts at the textile plant. And you're calling abandoning our dog humane?" Michael stepped forward, holding a manila envelope. "There is one alternative. Grandpa's old property in the Ozarks, that defunct homestead he won in a card game back in the 50s. The land's still in the family trust. There's supposedly a house, though nobody's seen it in decades." "You can't be serious," Catherine said. "They're elderly and sick. That property is probably just wilderness by now." "It's all we can offer," Robert said, though his expression suggested relief at avoiding further responsibility. "Take it or take the assisted living placement. Either way, the farm's gone." Thomas accepted the envelope containing a faded deed and a hand-drawn map. Inside was a note in his grandfather William's distinctive script. "For when the world forgets your worth, the land remembers. Trust the dog." "We'll take the homestead," Margaret said firmly, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "All 3 of us." The truck's headlights finally caught a weathered sign, "Willow Creek Settlement, Eastern, 1951. But as they rounded the final bend, hope dissolved into dismay. The homestead was a disaster. The main house sagged on its foundation, windows shattered, porch collapsed. Surrounding it were the skeletal remains of what might have once been a thriving rural community. Abandoned grain silos, rusted farm equipment, and collapsed outbuildings. "Dear God," Margaret whispered. Duke leaped from the truck before Thomas could stop him. Instead of running into the wilderness, the dog began methodically circling the property, nose to the ground, tail stiff with concentration. "What's he doing?" Margaret asked. "Being smarter than our children," Thomas muttered. "Checking if it's safe." They had $840 in cash, canned goods for maybe 10 days, Margaret's medications that would run out in 2 weeks, and a 50-pound bag of dog food that seemed woefully inadequate in this desolate place. Inside the house, devastation greeted them. The roof had partially collapsed, allowing weather to destroy most of the interior. Animal droppings suggested multiple species had claimed the space. A cast-iron stove sat rusted and disconnected in what might have been a kitchen. Thomas sank onto an overturned crate, the weight of their situation crushing him. "Maybe they were right. Maybe I've failed you both." Margaret took his weathered hand while scratching Duke's ears with her free one. "Thomas Brennan, we survived the 2008 recession, raised 3 children on farm wages, and buried both our parents with dignity. The 3 of us aren't done yet." Duke suddenly perked up, ears forward, staring toward the darkness beyond the broken door. A low, alert growl rumbled in his chest. "What is it, boy?" Thomas followed the dog's intense gaze but saw nothing except gathering darkness. "He's always sensed things we can't," Margaret said. "Maybe that's exactly what we need out here." Duke padded to the door and stood waiting, his posture clear. "Follow me." Against all logic, they followed the dog through the overgrown brush to what appeared to be a root cellar 30 yards from the main house. Duke began digging purposefully at the buried door until Thomas could pull the frozen handle. Inside, illuminated by Thomas's flashlight, was a concrete room stocked with preserved goods, decades old but still sealed, stacks of salvageable lumber, basic tools, and most surprisingly, a propane heating system with full tanks. Someone prepared for hard times, Thomas whispered. Not someone, Margaret corrected, pointing to initials carved into the wall. WB 1952. Your grandfather, William Brennan. Duke sat beside them, tail sweeping the dusty floor, his expression almost smug. Good boy, Thomas whispered. Very good boy. Dawn arrived with brutal clarity. Thomas woke in the truck, every muscle aching, to find Duke sitting alert at the window, staring intently at the hillside behind the house. What do you see, boy? Duke whined softly and pawed at the window. Beside him, Margaret stirred. Her breathing labored in the thin morning air. Throughout the day, Duke maintained his vigilance. He would periodically circle the property, then return to stare at the same section of hillside with unwavering focus. I think he wants us to follow him, Thomas said finally. I don't know if I can make that climb, Margaret admitted, touching her chest where breathing had become a struggle. But Duke wouldn't leave without her. When Thomas tried to go alone, the dog planted himself beside Margaret, refusing to move. He won't leave you, Thomas realized. Whatever's up there, he thinks you need to see it too. The climb was excruciating. Every few yards, Margaret needed to rest, leaning against trees, her breathing shallow despite the portable oxygen. But Duke remained patient, waiting whenever they stopped, then urging them forward with soft woofs when Margaret had recovered. When Duke finally darted ahead behind a cluster of boulders, his excited barking echoed across the hillside. Rounding the rocks, they stopped in astonishment. Nestled in a natural depression was a steaming pool about 20 feet across, its waters crystal clear despite the cold air. Wisps of vapor rose from the surface, creating an ethereal haze in the morning sunlight. A hot spring, Thomas breathed. Duke stood proudly at the pool's edge, tail wagging, clearly pleased with himself. He dipped one paw in the water, then looked back at them expectantly. Thermal activity, Margaret said, her scientific mind sparking to life. Probably mineral-rich. People pay fortunes at spas for waters like this. Thomas helped her to the edge where she could sit on a flat rock. She trailed her fingers through the water, then raised them to her nose. It smells like sulfur and minerals. Duke barked once, then began digging several feet from the pool's edge. Within moments, his paws uncovered a metal corner protruding from the earth. Thomas knelt beside him, brushing away decades of soil to reveal a rusted metal box. Stenciled across its lid, W. Brennan, 1952. Inside the waterproof container, they found a leather-bound journal, geological surveys, and a faded photograph showing a man unmistakably Thomas's grandfather standing beside this very pool. Next to him sat a cattle dog that looked remarkably like Duke. On the back, handwritten, "Nature's pharmacy heals what medicine cannot. Scout found it first. Dogs always know." Margaret removed her shoes and slipped her feet into the warm water. The effect was almost immediate. Her tight expression relaxed, the lines of pain around her mouth softening. "It feels like it's reaching inside me," she murmured. By the time they returned to the house, Julia walked with noticeably less effort, her breathing less desperate, more rhythmic. That night, huddled in the truck with William's journal open between them, they read by flashlight about the spring's remarkable properties. The water runs warm year-round. Martha's arthritis vanished after 2 months of soaking. The children's chronic infections cleared. Scout led us to it on our 3rd day here, like he knew exactly what we needed. I believe this land chose us, not the other way around. Deeper in the journal, they found entries about multiple springs, each with different mineral compositions treating different ailments. Notes about neighbors who came secretly for treatments, about offers from pharmaceutical companies, one letter offering $30,000 in 1952 money, and about William's decision to keep the springs a family secret. The final entry, dated a month before William's death, read, "The land keeps its secrets for those who need them most. Scout's line has scattered, but I believe one will return someday when the springs are needed again. The dogs remember what humans forget." Thomas looked at Duke. "You knew. Somehow, you knew." Over the following weeks, purpose replaced despair. Thomas, drawing on decades of farm equipment maintenance, began the systematic restoration of the house. Duke showed an uncanny ability to locate exactly what was needed: salvageable lumber in fallen outbuildings, intact windows in abandoned structures, even solar panels from a more recent failed settlement attempt. Margaret, growing stronger with daily visits to the springs, began cataloging the healing water's properties. Following William's journal and Duke's guidance, they discovered 4 distinct springs, each with unique mineral compositions and therapeutic effects. Their most ambitious project was creating accessible paths to each spring, with Duke somehow understanding every step, dragging branches to reinforce trails and alerting them to unstable ground. The physical changes became impossible to ignore. Margaret, who had required oxygen for even slight exertion, now moved freely. Her persistent cough had diminished. Her complexion transformed from gray to healthy pink. Thomas's arthritic pain receded so dramatically he could work full days on repairs without medication. Duke, at 9 years old, showed remarkable vitality. His coat gleamed, his movements were energetic, and the gray around his muzzle seemed less pronounced. Their isolation gradually decreased as mountain roads cleared. On supply trips to the nearest town, Duke's exceptional behavior opened conversations with locals. Word spread carefully about the elderly couple who'd transformed the abandoned homestead, and about their remarkable dog. Their first unplanned visitor arrived 3 months after their arrival, a local farmer named Jim Crawford, limping badly, who'd broken down nearby. Before Thomas could offer to help with the truck, Duke approached the stranger, circling him with working nose. Then the dog tugged at Jim's pant leg before trotting toward the path leading to one particular spring. "Your dog wants something," Jim observed. "He wants to show you something," Margaret said carefully. "If you'd like to follow him." After 20 minutes, soaking in the warm mineral water, Jim walked back with noticeably less pain. "What is this place? And how did your dog know what I needed?" Thus began a careful expansion. Through Jim and a few other locals, a small network of people with chronic health issues began making occasional pilgrimages to the springs. Duke greeted each visitor with the same assessment routine, invariably guiding them to whichever spring best matched their needs. Thomas and Margaret established simple guidelines. Visits by appointment only, no commercial activity, contributions for maintenance rather than fees. These contributions, sometimes monetary, often practical goods or services, allowed them to enhance the facilities without depleting their savings. By summer, their routine included visitor days 3 times weekly. Duke's role evolved beyond guide. He became integral to the healing process itself, his calming presence seeming to enhance the water's effects. The confrontation came on a bright July morning. 3 luxury vehicles appeared on the access road, and Thomas's stomach tightened as he recognized them. Robert emerged first, surveying the transformed property with obvious shock. Catherine and Michael followed, along with their spouses, all dressed in expensive casual wear that looked absurd in the rural setting. Duke's posture shifted immediately, not aggressive but protective, positioning himself between Thomas and Margaret and their approaching children. "Mom, Dad," Robert called. "You both look incredible." "Hello, Robert," Margaret said evenly. "This is unexpected. We've been trying to reach you for months," Catherine said, legal portfolio already in hand. "No phone service, no response to letters. Clearly you've been busy," Michael added, gesturing at the thriving homestead. "What exactly have you created here?" Before Thomas could respond, Robert got to the point. "We've been hearing stories about healing springs, about an elderly couple running some kind of wellness retreat, about a remarkable therapy dog." He looked pointedly at Duke. "Sound familiar?" The atmosphere tensed as the 2 groups faced each other, the abandoned parents who had transformed exile into purpose, and the children who had discarded them only to return when something valuable appeared. "May we talk?" Robert finally asked. "The porch," Thomas said. "Not inside." What followed was a tense discussion. The children had done their research about mineral rights, water rights, the potential commercial value. They spoke of development opportunities, wellness resort concepts, marketing Duke as a therapy dog celebrity. "Where were you when we had $800 and a collapsed roof?" Thomas asked quietly. "When your mother couldn't breathe? When we thought we might lose Duke because we couldn't afford veterinary care? We made mistakes," Robert admitted. "But this, what you've built, could benefit everyone. Properly managed, this could be worth millions." Thomas disappeared into the house, returning with a folder of documents. "As a lawyer, Catherine, you'll appreciate this. I've transferred all mineral and water rights to the Willow Creek Healing Foundation, a non-profit established 2 months ago. Margaret, myself, and, interestingly, Duke, are listed as trustees for life." "You can't make a dog a trustee," Catherine protested. "Actually," came a new voice, "in several states you can designate an animal as a beneficiary with human trustees. It's quite legal, and in this case quite appropriate. Dr. Sarah Mitchell approached from the path, medical bag in hand. She was a local veterinarian who'd become fascinated by the springs and Duke's abilities. "The foundation structure is sound," Dr. Mitchell continued. "I serve as one of the trustees for Duke's interests, along with 3 other local professionals. The springs are protected from commercial exploitation." The visit took an unexpected turn when Duke suddenly approached Michael, studying him with unusual intensity. After a long moment, the dog gave a soft woof and moved toward a specific spring path, looking back expectantly. "What's he doing?" Michael asked. "He's inviting you to follow," Thomas explained, his tone softening. "Duke has an ability to sense what people need, even when they don't know themselves." What happened over the next several days would transform everything. A sudden storm isolated them all at the homestead, forcing the estranged family into close quarters. During this time, Duke's true nature became impossible to ignore. The dog guided each family member to different springs based on ailments they hadn't mentioned: Robert's irregular heartbeat, Catherine's chronic pain, Michael's anxiety. Each treatment brought undeniable improvement. More significantly, Duke prevented disaster multiple times during the storm, alerting them to flooding dangers, structural weaknesses, and even guiding them to William's hidden cache of emergency supplies. Working together through the crisis, the family began to heal wounds deeper than physical ailments. The children, stripped of their professional facades and luxurious comforts, rediscovered the parents they'd taken for granted. Robert, after Duke guided him through several treatments for his heart condition, finally broke down. "I came here thinking I could manage you, convert this into profit. Instead, you're saving my life. Again." 6 months after the storm, Willow Creek Healing Foundation formally opened as a non-commercial healing sanctuary. The children, transformed by their experiences, now contributed in meaningful ways. Robert provided business infrastructure while respecting the nonprofit mission. Catherine created legal protections for the land. Michael designed sustainable visitor facilities. Limited, carefully managed access brought people with chronic conditions that conventional medicine had failed to resolve. Duke, now officially recognized as the sanctuary's therapy director, with human proxies, greeted each arrival with his diagnostic routine. The sanctuary's reputation spread through professional healthcare networks. Doctors made discreet referrals. Research institutions proposed studies of the water's properties and Duke's therapeutic techniques. Thomas and Margaret, the couple who'd arrived broken and abandoned, now stood at the center of a thriving healing community. Their wisdom and experience were valued, their daily work meaningful. Most remarkably, Duke showed no signs of slowing at 10 years old. The springs had rejuvenated him just as they'd healed his humans. Then, one autumn day, Michael arrived with an unexpected passenger, a young cattle dog puppy whose markings strikingly resembled Duke's. "Found her at the shelter," Michael explained. "Something about her reminded me of Duke." Dr. Mitchell examined the puppy. Her DNA shows genetic markers suggesting she's related to Duke, though the generational distance is unclear. Thomas remembered William's journal. "Scout's line will return when needed. The dogs remember." Duke approached the puppy with unusual gentleness. The younger dog followed his movements with remarkable attentiveness, as if recognizing him as teacher rather than stranger. "He won't live forever," Dr. Mitchell said quietly. "Perhaps this is nature's way of ensuring continuity." The puppy approached the porch steps, studying Thomas and Margaret with intensity beyond her young age. She placed one paw on the bottom step, not climbing, but making connection. Duke returned to his position between Thomas and Margaret, looking from them to the puppy with clear expectation. "I think," Thomas said slowly, "we're being introduced to the future of Willow Creek." "Welcome, little one," Margaret said softly. The young dog climbed the steps and settled beside Duke, their postures mirroring each other as they gazed out over the sanctuary they were born to protect. As twilight deepened, Thomas reflected on their journey. What had begun in betrayal had transformed into purpose. The children who discarded them now participated in their legacy. The land that should have been exile had become their kingdom. And through it all, the constant had been Duke, companion, guardian, healer, the dog who'd shown more loyalty than family, more wisdom than doctors, more healing ability than modern medicine. The homestead they'd thought was their ending had become their greatest beginning. The first hard freeze came early, and with it a freak-cold snap that turned the mountain air to glass. On a moonless night, the propane heater in the root cellar sputtered, then failed. By dawn, Margaret's breathing had grown ragged again, each inhale a climb. The access road was a white ribbon buried under ice. No ambulance could make it. Duke paced the cabin like a metronome wound too tight, then froze, head up, nose cutting the air. He pawed at the door, insisting. Thomas wrapped Margaret in blankets and lifted her into the truck, but the engine only coughed. "We're on foot," he said, voice steady because hers needed it to be. They followed Duke through a forest, muffled to silence, the dog breaking trail along a ridge he had never taken them to before. Catherine, Michael, and Robert, visiting for winterizing, caught up with them bearing lanterns and rope without being asked. Family, for once, moved as one. Wind knifed across the rocks, stealing what little breath Margaret had left. "I can't," she whispered, collapsing to one knee. Duke returned, pressed his shoulder beneath her hand, and leaned, as if lending her his strength. He barked once, sharp, then bolted toward a seam of black in the hillside, a narrow fissure breathing faint mist. Inside, heat breathed back. A cavern opened like a lung, and at its heart a pool pulsed with delicate warmth, the surface feathered with vapor. Etched in the mineral crust above it, WB, and below it a single word scratched in a blade's hurried hand. Breath. Margaret slid her feet in first, then her calves, then, supported by Thomas and the children, her whole body to the shoulders. The warmth moved through her like a tide. The panic of empty lungs loosened. Her chest rose, held, released. Again. Color touched her cheeks. A crack thundered from the ceiling, ice sloughing from a ledge. Robert lunged, pulling Margaret toward the lip as a slab shattered into the pool. The lantern sputtered out. Darkness swallowed sound. Duke leapt from the stones into black water. For a heartbeat there was only the slap of waves against rock, and Thomas's voice calling a name he'd been given before his children were born. Then a splash to their left. Duke surfaced, teeth fastened to the blanket at Margaret's shoulder, kicking hard, guiding her toward the shelf. Catherine and Michael hauled her up. Thomas reached for Duke, but the dog twisted mid-water, paddling to nose a fallen lantern to the shore as if to say, "Not yet." He scrambled out last, shaking once, and pressed his head beneath Margaret's hand until her fingers curled into his ruff. They stayed until the storm thinned and Margaret could stand. On the cave wall, under William's initials, Thomas traced the final scratch with a fingertip. "He knew," he said softly. "He left this for when we had nothing else." Duke sat between them on the stone lip, guardian of breath, of water, of the narrow bridge between losing and keeping the life you love. Spring returned slowly to Willow Creek. The breath cavern became a carefully protected sanctuary within the sanctuary, visited only with a trustee present, its existence unmentioned in any pamphlet. The Foundation's charter, strengthened by Catherine's language and Robert's governance, codified what the storm had taught them. The land was to be stewarded, not sold. Healed people would be partners, not customers. Researchers came, quietly, by referral, and left with samples and a new respect for the mystery they could measure but not own. Michael's design scattered small, beautiful structures like careful footprints, warm, changing huts, shaded benches, discreet rails along the steepest turns of the trails. Contributions covered costs. Surplus funded a clinic day once a month for locals who could not travel. The children kept showing up, not for photographs or credit, but for work that stained hands and settled hearts. They learned the rhythms, sunrise checks of flow and temperature, evening rounds with Duke, a ledger kept in pencil and gratitude. In late summer, the puppy, now called Willow, began to mirror Duke's routes. She learned where the ground hummed faintly under paw pads, where the scent of iron meant the strength spring and the lemon faint tang meant nerve. She watched, then led, then waited, each success greeted with Duke's approving bump of his shoulder. On an autumn afternoon, the maples went to copper all at once. Margaret and Thomas carried 2 mugs of tea to the porch and sat where they always sat, side by side, knees touching, the world rinsed in gold. Duke lay at their feet, head on Margaret's boot, Willow a warm bracket against his flank. 47 years, Thomas said, and all the things I thought I was, mechanic, provider, owner of land, turned out to be smaller than this. What are you now? Margaret asked. Keeper, he said. Borrower. Grateful. Duke lifted his head at a wind shift, then relaxed again, breath deep and easy. He watched the path and the clearing, and the rise where the first visitors would appear with the dusk, and he watched Margaret, the way he always had, as if making sure she would still be here when the stars came out. That winter, when the first snow fell soft and slow, Duke chose his place. Not in the cave, not beside a spring, but on the porch between the two chairs, where the scent of cedar and tea and the people he had kept filled the air. He laid his head on Margaret's foot, sighed once, and slept. They buried him under the willow that had somehow taken root in mountain soil, the tree William had planted as a dare to the future. On the stone marker, Thomas carved 3 words William had left them long ago: trust the dog. Willow nosed the fresh-turned earth, then lifted her gaze to the ridge. She trotted to the trailhead, paused and looked back. Not a question, but an invitation. Margaret stood without effort. Thomas rose beside her. They followed the young dog down the path Duke had worn into the world. In the years that followed, people came and were made lighter. Some left their canes by the porch. Some left their fear in the steam that rose in silver threads at dawn. All left understanding that healing is a covenant, between people and place, between work and water, between what a family was and what it chose to become. The homestead they'd thought was their ending remained what it had become on the day the dog led them to the first door, a beginning that kept beginning. And whenever a life arrived frayed by the world's forgetting, Willow would meet it at the gate, sit in the exact center of the path and wait until the people remembered, as the land always does, their worth.